Justice Adolfo S. Ascuna, Chancellor, Philippine Judicial Academy. Justices of the collegiate courts, both incumbent and retired. Judges of the first and second level courts. Children of Justice Herrera, namely Attorney Florentino M. Herrera III, Dr. Victoria Lourdes M. Herrera-Ruiz, happy birthday, ma'am, and Dr. Milagros M. Herrera-Arroyo. May I also recognize two grandchildren, Attorneys Amor and Ana Herrera, Attorney Brenda J.C. Angeles Mendoza, Chief of our Philippine Mediation Center Office, Attorney Jose Jesus M. Decini Jr., Vice Chairperson, Philippine Judicial Academy, Department of Court Technology, fellow workers in government, friends, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon, everyone. Our 2017 Philippine Judicial Academy founding Chancellor Emeritus Justice Ameurfina Aguinaldo Melencio-Herrera awardee for the most outstanding professorial lecturer is no stranger to all of us. His passion for public service and information technology was evident early on. After completing his Bachelor of Arts degree in economics and graduating at the top rung of his law class both at the University of the Philippines in Diliman, he started his professional career as a research attorney of Chief Justice Roberto Concepcion in the 1986 Philippine Constitutional Commission, which drafted our 1987 Constitution. He then joined the court long before many of us did, in September 1986 as a law clerk of then Associate Justice Florentino P. Feliciano, while also doing work at the House of Representatives Electoral Tribunal. Back then, he was a de facto executive director of the Supreme Court Computer Committee of then Justices Andres R. Narvasa, Justice Melencio-Herrera, and Justice Feliciano, which laid the foundation for and set up what is now known as the MISO, or Management Information System Office. After 3 years in the court in November 1989, he went into private practice by joining Sisip Salazar, Hernandez, and Gatmaitan, and focused on litigation, arbitration, and corporate work. In less than 5 years, he was back in information technology and founded and became the chairperson and president of Asia, an electronic publishing, research systems development, and database design company. Because of his love for the court, he gave the court compact discs of Supreme Court decisions. CD Technologies Asia provided the court some 3,000 copies of Juris and Laws Judiciary Edition for free for all our courts nationwide. This was long before our e-library was established. After around a decade and a half, in 2008, when the court was having difficulty in looking for a head of the MISO because of the stringent qualification standards for the position, I, as Chief of Staff of the Office of Chief Justice Renato Espuno, decided to give our lecturer a call. I did not know him personally. He had left the court when I joined it. I just knew that he was a former law clerk, had something to do with CD Asia, which gave compact discs to the court for free. And I also knew that it would be extremely difficult for him to drop his lucrative dealings for the measly compensation of an MISO head. But still, I wanted to take a chance. We met for a quick lunch at a mall restaurant in Robinson's Ermita. I say quick because in 20 minutes, our lunch was over and the court already had a new... He also then became the chairperson of the Court Technology Department of the Philippine Judicial Academy. A practical, no-nonsense performer, he did what he had to do and accomplished some urgently needed house cleaning in the MISO. He prepared it to carry out the judiciary-wide Enterprise Information Systems Plan, which we are now slowly and carefully implementing. For that, he was deeply respected and well appreciated by the MISO officials and staff. Later, however, in 2011, he experienced some professional differences with some development partners as he believed in the Filipino talent and wanted to save the court and government a huge amount of money. Rather than putting the court and some justices in a predicament, he decided to resign and leave quietly. Later that year, he was appointed to the Board of Trustees of the Metropolitan Water Works and Sewerage System, or the MWSS, and later in a concurrent capacity as acting chief of the MWSS Regulatory Office. Meanwhile, he continued to serve as a mediator and mediator trainer for the Philippine Judicial Academy. In 2015, he was appointed Undersecretary and spokesperson of the Department of Justice during the brief stint of then DOJ Secretary Alfredo Benjamin S. Caguiwa. In 2016, when then Secretary Caguiwa was appointed Supreme Court Justice, our lecturer was elevated as Department of Justice Secretary. Known to his colleagues and friends as Copper, a man of integrity, a real public servant, and a true friend, Your Honors, friends, ladies and gentlemen, let's please welcome our 2017 Philippine Judicial Academy founding Chancellor Emeritus Justice Ameurfina Aguinaldo Melencio-Herrera awardee for the most outstanding professorial lecturer, Secretary Emmanuel L. Caparas.
Don't know what to say after such a very long introduction. First off, I would like to acknowledge the presence of members of the family of Madam Justice Ameurfina Melencio-Herrera, Attorney Florentino Herrera, whom I met earlier, but I've heard of you, and I've known about you for a long time now. It's a pleasure to have met you today. Dr. Victoria Lourdes Herrera-Ruiz, happy birthday, ma'am. And Dr. Milagros M. Herrera-Arroyo. It's also a pleasure to meet you. I know that you work with my kuya, and please continue to do the good work you do in your clinics. I also want to acknowledge the presence, of course, of the Chancellor, Adolfo Escuna, my boss for many years and a man whom I respect very deeply. Of course, my recruiter, Court Administrator Midas Marquez. We have shared many exploits together, some of them very difficult, but always we were able to make do. Thank you. I'd also like to acknowledge the presence of Court of Tax Appeals Presiding Justice Del Rosario. Thank you very much for coming. And for everybody here, I'm sorry, I know that we have limited time also. For everybody here who is a colleague in the court or in the court system or a public servant, and everyone else, millennials and non-millennials alike. And I spot some colleagues from the DOJ. Magandang hapon po sa inyong lahat. Thank you for coming. The topic that I chose to deliver this afternoon is really not an easy one. It's difficult for those of us who practice it. It's probably one of the most difficult things that you've ever had to deal with. But I chose the topic because of its importance and its significance. Over the years, there have been incidents of cybercrime, there have been incidents of cybersecurity breaches that we cannot ignore because of the sheer magnitude of their impact on society, and not only society really, but the structures of society, how they are affected. So I chose this topic, and I hope I'm able to share with you at least some information that you will find useful later on. I just asked for them. Our topic is cybersecurity, the specter of crime and evolving challenges to the bench and bar. Spectre, a ghost, the quintessential villain, the one who lurks in the shadows and speaks in mind, the enemy who cannot be seen and therefore cannot be identified, the fearsome and formidable foe who commands an octopus-like network of evil that extends to every nook and cranny in every corner of the globe. As we all know, it's proven to be a brilliant ingredient in Sir Ian Fleming's recipe for storytelling. Stories which have captivated the minds and egos of millions all over the world, ever since the exploits of 007 were brought to the big screen in 1962. Fast forward by 55 years to the present, and the character is still the same, except for one significant difference. The octopus is now a spider, weaving its worldwide web of crime in both the physical world and in cyberspace. The setting could not be more apt for today. With that, let's dive into the main subject. There is much to share, and I hope the 40-minute and 2-hour synopsis I've prepared this afternoon helps give everyone a good view of the issue. Cybersecurity. The digital world abounds with enormous opportunities for growth and innovation. Look around you. In fact, look beside you. Anyone and everyone is carrying some form of device that links us to cyberspace. And any one of them could be just yours, if you wish. Not surprisingly, individuals, businesses, and governments have turned and are increasingly turning their attention to the significant benefits of cyberspace and the digital world. By spurring the creation of new products and services, the discovery of new markets, and a better understanding of humans and finding different ways of connecting with them, the digital world offers enormous potential. Unfortunately, in the rush, many precautions have been overlooked and risks underestimated. Even more unfortunately, and dangerously in fact, these oversights have the equally enormous potential to cause harm and damage, even ruin. The matter of security having been a mere afterthought in the initial stages of development of the computer and the internet, it comes as no surprise that issues of the nature crop up early and quickly, and they continue to do so today. Now let's tackle a few definitions to start. The lawyers that we are, or most of us are, we want to define our terms and we want to know where we're going. First term, cybersecurity. In Philippine law, the term refers to the collection of tools, policies, risk management approaches, actions, training, best practices, assurance, and technologies that can be used to protect the cyber environment and organization and users' assets. Next, cyber. Cyber refers to a computer or a computer network, the electronic medium in which online communication takes place. Excuse me. Now, we ask the question, security from what? Obviously, from cybercrime. Cybercrime, of course, which is defined in our law by way of offenses classified according to the nature of and participation in their commission. We will encounter more terms as I go on. Let's leave it at that for now. These are the terms that we want to know more about as we progress. Now, The rapid pace of technological development and innovation in the last 2 decades alone has ushered in a new era of great prosperity and wealth that mankind has never seen before. Bringing the discussion closer to home, our everyday usage of a dependence on smart devices, your mobile phones, your tablets, has altered our way of life in very fantastic ways. We have all been and shall perhaps remain forever mesmerized by technology's allure. Unknown to many of us, however, we have been lured to an Eden abundant not only in beauty, comfort, and convenience, but in poison fruit as well. In very significant ways, it is our endless amazement and fascination with technology that is causing many of our most serious problems today. Cybercrime is one of them, and it is rising every year. Every day, people and companies are attacked by hackers who in most cases are looking to steal data. For identity thieves, the more personal information they can unearth, the more money they can make. Today's massive scale of connectivity and interconnectivity makes access to all types of information easier than ever. And as more physical objects embedded with information sharing technology become ubiquitous, we all face increased vulnerability to cyber attack. Now, in a report dated December 12, 2011 on cybersecurity, the UN Department on Economic and Social Affairs states, cybercrime has now become a business which exceeds $1 trillion a year in online fraud, identity theft, and lost intellectual property, affecting millions of people around the world, as well as countless businesses and the governments of every nation. Cyber Ventures, a leading researcher and publisher covering the global cyber economy, saw the global cost of cybercrime rise to $3 trillion in 2015, and estimates it will double to $6 trillion in 2021. On the flip side of things, the firm also predicts cybersecurity will become a $1 trillion enterprise by then. With loss comes opportunity, I suppose. At this point, let me share still a few random statistics reported by IT researchers and professionals to lend some context to these figures and to give us a better understanding of the landscape ahead. In the year 2016, hackers attacked every 39 seconds. 95% of breached records came from 3 industries: government, retail, and technology. 43% of attacks targeted small businesses. 1 billion accounts and records were compromised worldwide. On the Pinoy front, the PNP Anti-Cybercrime Group reported 1,865 cases were filed last year, 36% of which involved internet threats and scams. They also reported that attacks on banking applications comprised 12% or 215 cases of cybercrime reported. Now, in this chart of cybercrime incidents prepared by the PNP-ACG, one will notice significant surges in the number of cases reported in the last 4 years. Please note, though, that not all instances of cybercrime are actually reported to the police, and the figures indicated might be a bit misleading for some of us. Now, that said, the Russian cybersecurity company Kaspersky Lab has seen enough yellow and red flags and wants us to be on our guard. The antivirus giant has warned that even in cyberspace, it's more fun in the Philippines. Now, After a few preliminary facts, let's look at our legal framework. Let's look at the international and the domestic milieu, as it were. In the international sphere, let's talk first about the Budapest Convention on Cybercrime. Cybercrime is a concern that has been around for decades, and the Council of Europe had been dealing with it from criminal law perspectives since the mid-1980s. By 2001, the issue had become sufficiently important to warrant a binding international treaty. Negotiated by the member states of the Council, together with Canada, Japan, South Africa, and the United States, the Convention on Cybercrime was opened for signature in Budapest, Hungary on November 23, 2001. More than 15 years later, it remains the most relevant and only binding international instrument on cybercrime and electronic evidence. Now, the Budapest Convention's main objective, set out in its preamble, is to pursue a common criminal policy aimed at the protection of society against cybercrime by adopting appropriate legislation and fostering international cooperation. It's a criminal justice treaty that provides states with criminalization of a list of attacks, procedural law tools to make the investigation of cybercrime and the securing of electronic evidence more easy, and international police and judicial cooperation on cybercrime and electronic evidence. Now, it is open for accession to any state prepared to implement it and engage in cooperation. To this date, 50 states have already become parties. That would be the European countries plus Australia, Canada, the Dominican Republic, Israel, Japan, Mauritius, Panama, Sri Lanka, and the USA. And another 17 states have already signed or been invited to accede. Notably, while the Philippines was invited to accede on June 15, 2011, the country has not done so at this moment. And the reason being that there is an extradition provision in the convention to which our country finds difficulty acceding to. The only time that the country will be able to accede to such provision is if the country requesting has an extradition treaty with the Philippines. So the Philippines is unable to entertain any extradition requests from a country with which it has no extradition treaty. That's the reason. Until May last year, 2016, this was the issue, and unfortunately, we were not able to push this through simply because of the absence of treaties with possible future countries who would be members of the Budapest Convention. Now, arising from the Budapest Convention and the union of the Council and the European Union, we have the Global Action on Cybercrime, or GLACY. In November 2013, following the Global Cyberspace Conference in Seoul, South Korea, GLACY project was born. It's a joint undertaking of the EU and the Council, established specifically to enable criminal justice authorities to engage in international cooperation on cybercrime and electronic evidence on the basis of the Budapest Convention. Underlying the main objective are commitments to support countries nationwide and worldwide to implement the Budapest Convention and provide assistance in the areas of judicial training, harmonization of legislation, law enforcement capacity building, and information sharing. These are basically the cornerstones of this international cooperation called the Budapest Convention. Now, with a broader geographical scope, the GLACY project has been able to assist Mauritius, Morocco, the Philippines, Senegal, South Africa, Sri Lanka, and Tonga, all considered priority countries due to their political commitment to implement the convention. Now, with GLACY having ended in October 2016, several of these countries would now be able to share their experience with their respective regions. by serving as hubs under the extended GLACI or GLACI Plus. Now, on the domestic front, we are not without our own legal weapons and defenses against cybercrime. We have, first, the Cybercrime Prevention Act. Now, it's not my intention to go through each of these laws in detail, otherwise we will be here until next year. But let me at least share with you what I believe are the main features of these laws as they pertain to cybercrime and cybersecurity. First, okay, I will read it. Apparently, the red is not very visible. Okay. The state recognizes the vital role of information and communications industries and the need to protect and safeguard the integrity of computer and communication systems, networks, and databases. Can you read it? Okay, sorry. And the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of information and data stored therein. The state shall adopt sufficient powers to effectively prevent and combat cybercrime offenses by facilitating their detection, investigation, and prosecution at both the domestic and international levels, and by providing arrangements for fast and reliable international cooperation. The Cybercrime Prevention Act also created the Cybercrime Investigation and Coordinating Center. Now, I will not delve into its functions, inasmuch as its primary functions have already been assumed by the Department of Information and Communications Technology. Then we have the Data Privacy Act of 2012, where the state recognizes the vital role of information and communications technology in nation building and its inherent obligation to ensure that personal information in information and communications systems in the government and private sector are secured and protected. By virtue of RA 10173, the National Privacy Commission is also created. Next, we have the Department of Information and Communications Technology Act of 2015. And the more significant functions that the DICT performs would be the exercise of all powers and functions related to cybersecurity. In this respect, it shall formulate the National Cybersecurity Plan, establish the National Computer Emergency Response Team, which is an integral element of the Budapest Convention, and it shall facilitate international cooperation on intelligence regarding cybersecurity matters. Again, another essential element of the convention. We also have the Rules on Electronic Evidence, which took effect on August 1, 2001. Main features here would be, one, it has now defined an electronic document and an electronic data message for purpose of practice in courts. Second, it provides rules and guidelines on the presentation, authentication, admissibility, and evidentiary weight of electronic evidence. It also allows the presentation of testimonial evidence through electronic means. Or in other words, if you wanted to present a witness who is unable to be physically present through Skype or Skype-like technology, that is possible. It's allowed. Then we also have Bangko Sentral Circular number 808, series of 2013. That circular provides guidelines on information technology risk management for all banks and other BSP-supervised institutions. The idea is to provide practical plans to address risks associated with emerging trends in technology and growing concerns on cybersecurity. This is a matter that the BSP takes very seriously, and I understand the BSP continues to issue updates regarding this policy. I am told that a new set of updates should be forthcoming in the next 2 weeks. They are actually there already, but they are not yet fit for release. Other relevant laws. Be here on screen. I won't go through them anymore one by one. These are laws that impact on the issue of cybercrime. And the discussion here would not be complete if I did not mention the section on law enforcement. Here, I would just like to acknowledge, and I think we should all acknowledge, the other players here, the law enforcement agencies, led by the Department of Justice, the National Bureau of Investigation, and the Philippine National Police, and still other agencies of government that come together to be able to provide services with respect to cybersecurity issues and cybercrime commissions. Now let's go to the virtual landscape. First element I would like to speak on regarding the virtual landscape is the Internet of Things. I'm sure the millennials in the audience know what the Internet of Things means, and the non-millennials are probably a little bit challenged by the term. But simply put, the Internet of Things is a gigantic network of Internet-connected devices. If the device can connect to the Internet and has the ability to transfer data over a network, theoretically it can be part of the Internet of Things. This includes almost anything you can think of, ranging from cell phones to home alarm systems to city surveillance networks. Medical devices such as a heart monitor implant or a biochip transporter in an endangered animal are likewise members of the Internet of Things. So you can imagine now, if you have gadgets which we use every day or which are seen every day, or we are exposed to them every day, being able to communicate with one another with or without our knowledge or consent. That is the Internet of Things, essentially. For many of us who love information, for many of us who like to keep tabs on everything, that's probably something like a godsend. But for many of us who value our privacy and who do not want to be bothered by this kind of intrusion, then that could be. Now, how did the Internet of Things evolve? It's not been around for very long. It was not actually until the 1950s that computers were born. The Internet, in fact, started out as part of the Defense Advanced Research Project Agency in the US in 1962, until it evolved into what they call ARPANET in 1969. In the 1980s, commercial service providers began supporting public use of ARPANET, allowing it to evolve into what we now call the Internet. Now, what happened here is that global positioning satellites became a reality in early 1993, and with the United States Department of Defense providing a very stable environment for this, they were able to put up 24 functional satellites. This was quickly followed by privately owned and commercial satellites being placed in orbit. And altogether, these satellites and landlines provide the basic communications framework for much of the Internet of Things. This is how interconnectivity came about, and that's what we're using today. As a concept, the Internet of Things wasn't given an official name until 1999. And one of the first examples was in the early 1980s when a Coca-Cola machine located at the Carnegie Mellon University was accessed by students who wanted to find out whether or not their favorite drink was there, if it was cold or hot, and how much it would cost. By the year 2013, the Internet of Things had evolved into a system using multiple technologies, ranging from the Internet to wireless communications, and including electromechanical systems. The traditional fields of automation, including the automation of buildings and homes, wireless sensor networks, GPS, control systems, and others, all support the Internet of Things. It is virtually everywhere today, both literally and figuratively. Now, some statistics. In 2017, it is estimated that 8.4 billion gadgets will be connected online and therefore part of the Internet of Things. That number will grow to 30.7 billion by the year 2020, 3 years from now, and again to 75.4 billion by 2025, 8 years from now. These are mind-boggling figures, don't you think? I don't think even hamsters can multiply that quickly. And take a look at the figure that says that estimated revenues of 300 billion US dollars with an impact, a global impact of 1.9 trillion US dollars in 2020. That's 3 years from now. It depends on where you sit and what your intentions are. This can be a great, wonderful opportunity for business. Okay? And with that comes, of course, all the services for business. Or it can be seen as a threat. Why? Because it changes the way we live. Everything changes. Everything will change. Life as we know it is already changing. For those of us who grew up in the 70s, 80s, everything around looks different. To the point that if I ask you right now, if you brought your cell phone with you, all of you would probably say yes. And if I ask you if you had left that at home or if you had forgotten it at home, would you suffer a panic attack? The answer would probably be yes. It's happened before, it will continue happening. And because of this dependence or interdependence that we now have with gadgets, we're finding ourselves in this situation. There's a good side to it. Obviously there is. But there's also a dangerous side to it. And I guess that's what we need to talk about. It's easy to talk about, the bells and the whistles. Let's not talk about where it's going wrong, because where it's going wrong is not where we want to go. However, that's where it's also going. I call this slide the joys of interconnectivity. Why? Because it promises everything. When thinking of the Internet of Things, consider the idea that any device capable can be interconnected with other devices. Imagine your printer knowing when you are running low on paper and automatically ordering more from the neighborhood store. Or the watch on your wrist telling you which part of your work you have been doing well in the last 3 hours. Or your mobile phone giving off a frantic alarm every time your favorite store or restaurant has a special offer. These are beautiful things. It makes life more convenient. But in truth, the IoT, or the Internet of Things, provides a nearly endless supply of opportunities to interconnect our devices and equipment. In terms of creativity, this field is wide open, with an infinite number of ways to interconnect devices. It can be an exciting time for innovative individuals. in part because we still don't fully understand the impact of these interconnections. Make no mistake about it, and here I will be politically correct. We already are in the smart age of global interconnectivity. While we may only have dreamt of these things before, we are now seeing cities that use big data for smarter, more agile urban planning, and a rise in faster, less expensive manufacturing processes due to the increased commercial viability of 3D printing. Not too long from now, we'll be riding in self-driving cars. The first self-driven or self-driving bus is already being tested in a remote area in Japan. And for those of us who have been following the news, there's a great big squabble going on now between Google and Uber with respect to their technologies on self-driving cars, with Google claiming that there's been industrial espionage. Now, let's not talk about that yet. Let's talk about that when the cars are already on the street. And we have accidents and we don't know where to claim insurance because no one was driving it. Now, what's the deal on data? It's data that's driving all of this. No data, you won't have any of this. But because data is just growing by leaps and bounds, this is happening. I mean, I put this statistic, this is a 2015 statistic. I just wanted to put it on the screen so that we will at least be able to understand the magnitude of all of this. I have more figures here, which will lend more color to this. First, the amount of global data doubles every 2 years. And please just check the slide, check the screen, and find out just how much data we already have today. Second, new devices are constantly being connected to the network. Old devices which were previously not connected are being connected. And you have now, the average of 3 or more than 3 devices per person now. We are becoming a device-driven society, whether at home or in the office, or even if we are just out enjoying a leisurely meal somewhere. In 2005, 136 data breaches were reported by the Privacy Rights Clearinghouse. More than 4,500 data breaches have been made public since then, with more than 816 million individual records breached. In actuality, this number is much higher. Again, because the total number of breaches reported include incidents for which the number of records is not known. Additionally, this is not a comprehensive compilation of all breached data, so the actual total records breached is likely to be high. I just put this on screen. We note that in the graph of US security breaches on the left side, if you can see it, the trend is not consistently on an uphill slope. However, the figures do indicate that while fewer breaches may have occurred, the individual breaches were larger, resulting in a greater number of records exposed for breach. Now, these are all statistics. The statistic in the middle, you have the world data breaches from 2005 to 2014. And if you were to calculate the number of records breached, they would already be in the hundreds of billions. But the largest data breach so far, and this I want to mention, is this. It involves a company called Experian, one of the 3 main credit reporting agencies in the US. In March 2012, Experian acquired a company called Court Ventures, which gathers and aggregates information from public records. At the time of acquisition, Court Ventures had a contract with a company called US InfoSearch, a company that provides location and other data. The arrangement enabled Court Ventures customers to access US InfoSearch data, in effect, allowing them to search and find a person's address in order to determine which court records to review. It happens that Court Ventures sold information to a number of third parties, including a Vietnamese fraudster service, which then provided its own customers with the opportunity to look up personal information of Americans, including financial information and social security numbers, which was then used for identity theft. This was, of course, explained by Experian. Experian explained, after the acquisition of Court Ventures, we were notified by the U.S. Secret Service that Court Ventures had been and was continuing to resell data from a U.S. InfoSearch database to a third party, possibly engaged in illegal activity. The suspect in this case posed as a legitimate business owner and obtained access to U.S. InfoSearch data through Court Ventures prior to the time Experian acquired the company. And so Experian maintains that no Experian databases were breached. U.S. InfoSearch's database were the source of the consumer information. Gets you thinking that you need not be directly involved to be victimized. And it also gets you thinking that to be totally secure, one must know the relations of everyone that you have relations with. You have business relations, you have personal relations, you have even very informal relations. You need to know everybody you've talked to, you've met, of the digital world into our real world. Now, let me just mention a few samples here so that we can go into the other. What happens when things go wrong in the Internet of Things? Well, this is what I call the Internet of Stings. And just to mention a few examples, I will not go into them again in detail, but here's some things that have happened. Let's talk first about this example. There were security researchers who exposed holes in everything from the Wi-Fi enabled Barbie. What happened here is security researchers Charlie Miller and Chris Valasek. What they did was, in July last year, they demonstrated that they could remotely hack a 2014 model Jeep Cherokee to disable its transmission and its brakes. Imagine being able to disable a vehicle's transmission and brakes remotely. Their work led Fiat Chrysler, the manufacturers, to issue an unprecedented recall for 1.4 million vehicles, mailing out USB drives with a patch for the vulnerable systems and blocking the attack on the Sprint network that connected its cars and trucks. Now, that Jeep attack turned out to be only the first in a series of car hacks that rattled the auto industry. The Tesla Model S, which is a big thing nowadays, was also made an example. Again, I won't go into details there. There are also the medical devices, and I will mention this because it's interesting. Critical medical equipment and devices also have software and architecture vulnerabilities that would let malicious actors hijack and control them. There is the case of the cardiologist for Dick Cheney, who feared that an attacker could deliver a fatal shock to the former vice president through his pacemaker. So what happened here was that the device was disabled, the Wi-Fi capability was removed, so that such a thing could not happen. Now, just to prove a point, students at the University of Alabama actually called in and showed Mr. Cheney's cardiologist that he was in fact correct, that they in fact could hack the pacemaker. I don't mean to scare anybody here who's wearing such a device. Just make sure it doesn't have a Wi-Fi capability attached to it. And what happened actually here is that the students were able to make a proof of concept of what they were saying, simply by performing what they said they could do. Now here's the other interesting thing that I will mention. Mattel, you know, the toy company, it had added Wi-Fi connectivity to its Barbie dolls. Now, what happened here, following that, a gun manufacturer decided to equip a sniper rifle with a Wi-Fi device. What was that Wi-Fi device for? It was a tracking point. It would enable the user of the rifle to hit its target accurately, very accurately, simply by GPS positioning and other data that the rifle's scope would collect and then send back to the net to triangulate and locate the target. Now, there's a married hacker couple, Runa Sandvik and Michael Auger, showed that they could take control of this device. Okay? They exploited the rifle's insecure Wi-Fi to change variables in the gun's self-aiming scope system, allowing them to disable the rifle, make it miss its target, or even make it hit a target of their choosing. Now, can you imagine how dangerous that is? There's a message here, no, for Tracking Point and for others who are so inclined to place Wi-Fi enablers in their products, no? And I will share that message with you. It comes from Miss Sandvik herself. This is her message. When you put technology on items that haven't had it before, you run into security challenges you haven't thought about before. And this is my own personal interpretation of that. Let me just move on so that I don't keep you here for too long. I had put together some incidents which I think I don't need to talk about this anymore, no? Do I? Simply put, there are many lonely people in this world. And because of that loneliness, or perhaps because of that curiosity, because the love bug was distributed to the email addresses of known people. People clicked, people connected, people got bugged. But let me talk about something more current. I will share information with you that I can, that is known publicly. Other than that, I apologize because I can't. But here's what happened. On March 27, 2016, persons under the banner Anonymous Philippines hacked into the website of the Philippine Commission on Elections and defaced it. The hackers left a message calling for tighter security measures on the vote counting machines to be used during the 2016 Philippine election. Within the day, a separate group of hackers, LulzSec Filipinas, posted an online link to what it claims to be the entire database of the COMELEC, and updated the post to include 3 mirror links to the index of the database's downloadable files. The size of the leaked files by LulzSec Filipinas was 340 gigabytes. Now, the security firm Trend Micro weighed in on the matter and said that they estimated the breach at about 50 million registered voters who had been placed at risk. They also estimated that 1.3 million records of overseas Filipino voters had been breached. They also said that 15.8 million records of fingerprints, along with a list of candidates for political positions dating back to 2010, were likewise found. Now, the COMELEC was quick to answer this, with the chair saying that no confidential information was actually leaked and that the 26 elections would be free from that. He emphasized that the data appearing in the COMELEC website is accessible to the public and no sensitive information is hosted there. Moreover, he said that the results website that the election body is planning will be hosted in a different website with different servers with better security. He further added that the database might be fake, saying that no biometrics data were compromised by the hackers, as opposed to the findings of Trend Micro. Now, on April 20, the National Bureau of Investigation apprehended one of the suspected hackers, a 20-year-old IT graduate student in his home in Sampaloc, Manila. The authorities took 3 weeks in order to track him down. He claimed and he said he was a member of the hacking group Anonymous Philippines, admitting that he had defaced the COMELEC website but denied leaking any data. He said the hacking was merely intended to show the vulnerability of the COMELEC website, which is what many hackers say. And actually, many of them actually not just say it, but that's exactly what they mean. They mean no other harm but that. There was a second hacker who was apprehended, Jonel De Asis, who is a 23-year-old computer science graduate, so 20 and 23, super millennials, at his residence in Muntinlupa. He was later identified as one of the ringleaders of the notorious LulzSec Filipinas. He admitted hacking the website and leaking the COMELEC data. He also admitted collaborating with the first hacker, Mr. Biteng, in the hacking incident. Biteng breached the server of the COMELEC website, while De Asis downloaded the 340 gigabyte information file, the database of voters. But he also said that they did not hack the voting machines, which are connected to a different server. Now, we read about this, we were bothered, we were troubled by this, and okay, no harm done, or at least nothing that would harm the result of the elections. But I just want to add a footnote here. The footnote I'd like to add here is a later incident, in fact recent, where the COMELEC chair has been recommended for prosecution by the that emanates from it, everything that it gives birth to, and in all its forms, in all its evolutionary, beings. It's almost like shooting the messenger, and not the person who actually sent the message. I think perhaps we need to look more introspectively here, study it, because if we continue down the road, I'm afraid that victims are going to be hailed to court, and there might come a time when you have leaders of government or leaders with digital data, which is practically everything. Why? Because they'll be found liable for something they did not know anything about. that they could not possibly have been aware of. If you took a look at the statistics on spending, people don't want to spend for security, but yet you expect delivery of such high services. So that doesn't mix. If you expect privacy, if you expect confidentiality, if you expect integrity and availability, then spend for it. If you don't spend for it, the likelihood that you're going to get it the way you want it is very low. Why? Because of all of the statistics that we've been sharing this afternoon. Anyway, enough of my rant. Let's take a look at another one. The Bangladesh bank heist, which happened in February last year. It's a very opportune time for me to be there. Excuse me, I'm going to read this because I don't want to go overboard. Okay, the Bangladesh bank heist. Many of us already know what happened here, but let me just give you a few details so that we can understand this a little better, at least in respect of cyber security. The hackers in this case went through what they call the SWIFT. SWIFT stands for the Society for Worldwide Interbank Financial Telecommunication, and it's a consortium that operates a trusty and closed computer network for communication between member banks around the world. Now, this consortium dates back to the 1970s and is based in Belgium, overseen by the National Bank of Belgium and a committee composed of representatives from the US Federal Reserve, the Bank of England, the European Central Bank, the Bank of Japan, and other major banks. The SWIFT platform has 11,000 users and processes about 25 million communications daily, most of them money transfer transactions. Now, financial institutions and brokerage houses that use SWIFT have codes that identify each institution as well as credentials that authenticate and verify the transactions. Now that is the background here. On February 4, 2016, unknown hackers used the SWIFT credentials of Bangladesh Central Bank employees to send more than 3 dozen fraudulent money transfer requests to the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, asking the bank to transfer millions of the Bangladesh bank funds to bank accounts in the Philippines, Sri Lanka, and other parts of Asia. So what was compromised here essentially were the credentials of the Bangladesh bank that they had with SWIFT. It was not SWIFT per se that was compromised, it was the credentials. That's how the hackers were able to enter. Having done that, they managed to get $81 million sent to a local bank. I won't mention any more the name. Via 4 different transfer requests and an additional $20 million that went to Pan-Asia Banking in a single request. Now, the Bangladesh bank managed to halt $850 million more in other transactions. However, the $81 million, which was deposited in the Philippine bank, was withdrawn and lost. We were able to recover the $20 million sent to Pan-Asia Banking, but that was all of it. That was it. Now, the question here is this. The questions that we were all focused on were, why was the $81 million deposited in the Philippine bank account? Why were they able to withdraw it? If you look at the circumstances, there had already been requests from Bangladesh Bank. There were, in fact, demands not to release the money. But despite those requests, the money was released. I think that's the physical side of it. That's not the cyber side of it anymore. That's the physical side. But the cyber side of it is how they were able to breach those credentials of the Bangladesh employees. So questions as to, was it an inside job? If it was not an inside job, then these hackers must have been casing the bank and casing the people there for a period of time, that's a long period of time. In fact, if you take a look at the other circumstances here, the bank accounts in the Philippines where the money was deposited had been there for several weeks. With a balance of, if I believe, if I get it correctly, something like $500 until all of this money started coming in. And the other part is this, which for me is another telling circumstance. The hackers might have stolen much more if not for a typographical error that caught the Federal Reserve Bank in New York. No? The hackers apparently indicated that at least one of the transfers should go to the Shalika Foundation. But the word foundation was misspelled to foundation. So, I don't know what you call that. I know there's a word for it. But that saved them, no? The misspelling of the word foundation helped save the Bangladesh Bank of upwards of $500 million. Simply because of a misspelling. So here you have, well, the human intervention, which actually did well for the bank. Okay, did poorly for the hackers, but the thing here is this. I mean, if you've read the latest reports, Philippine government is now working alongside the U.S. Federal Bureau of Investigation to bring perpetrators to justice. The U.S. suspect, in fact, that there is a sinister party behind all of this. They suspect that North Korea might be involved. So let's find out. Let's find out. Just two more. Uber and the app. App meaning Apple. But it involves the Uber app. Have you heard of this? Just very recently, as recently as I think a few weeks ago, Tim Cook, the CEO of Apple, met with the CEO of Uber, Mr. Travis Kalanick, and gave him a dressing down. It was a dressing down that Mr. Kalanick, I don't think, will ever forget, and which actually resolved this issue. But what happened here? What happened here is that for those who were using in this case, it's the iPhone. They were using iPhones and they had the Uber app installed in the iPhone. What happened is that even if the Uber app had already been deleted from the iPhone, Uber was actually still able to gather information coming from the phones of the users, even though the app had already been deleted. What's worse is even after the phones, the memories of the phones had already been completely wiped out, still the fingerprint of the user was still there, and the fingerprint of the app was still there, so that it was still able to transmit information pertaining to the user of the phone. Now, this is what they call in the industry fingerprinting. It's used for good. It's used for good, and apparently in this case, Mr. Kalanick says there was no intention to steal anything from the user or to violate privacy, but nonetheless, there are people who suspect that there's more to it than that. What happened here? Now, when someone installs or uninstalls an app that uses fingerprinting, it leaves behind a small piece of code that can be used as an identifier if the app is ever reinstalled on the device. Now, for the iOS App Store, Apple originally permitted developers to keep track of their users over time using a broad system. However, beginning with iOS 5, Apple had scaled this back and actually prevented this from happening. That's why they were alarmed that these incidents were taking place, because in its mind, this shouldn't be happening at all. What happened here again is something where I will read the quote. Uber took it one step further, which is to say one step too far, using application program interfaces designed to access data like an iPhone's device registry and Apple assigned serial number, which would then allow it to identify and locate the user. Now, according to security professionals, this is absolutely forbidden. So therefore, no matter what is said by anybody from Uber, this shouldn't have happened at all. But let's leave it at that, because apparently Apple decided to keep Uber in the App Store. So probably for now, all is well. Let's find out if Uber does something again. Finally, there is Apple versus the FBI. You're all familiar with the San Bernardino shooting? Well, the perpetrator, one of the perpetrators of that horrible incident, Syed Farouk, he was gunned down later on. The FBI were able to take possession of his cell phone, which happened to be an iPhone 5. They were able to get into the cloud, to his cloud account, and they were able to look at dates and some important information there, except that there were certain dates which were missing. He hadn't downloaded it yet to the cloud, and therefore the FBI went to Apple, asked Apple for further assistance, and said, please, in simple terms, please hack that phone for us. Okay. Of course, Apple refused. Apple said, no one should have a key that turns civilian locks. It's like opening the door to a floodgate now of privacy violations. That's how Apple felt. In fact, just as a side note, as of if I'm not mistaken, as of December 2016, Apple had in fact sold its 1 billionth iPhone. So he knew what he was talking about. Now, bypassing the iPhone's password, which is what the FBI wanted Apple to do, meant creating a backdoor in its iOS mobile software that could then be used to access every other iPhone. So Apple simply said, look, if I give you this tool, then you can do it for every other iPhone out there. And I can't do that. I can't be responsible for that. Here you have already a situation where privacy rights are already in direct conflict in a very huge way, in a very significant way, with law enforcement. I know that we face smaller challenges similar to this, but this is a very big one, and it could be a very telling one. Why? Because this was never resolved. It was never resolved. Before the hearing between Apple and the FBI, apparently they were able to hack into the phone through a third party, which is rumored to be an Israeli security company. They were able to hack into the phone and get the data they wanted. So that still is up in the air. Now, sorry, but just to end this, just give me 5 more minutes, please. Why am I sharing all of this? Why am I saying this? This whole litany of statistics and facts and figures, and why? Because all of these facts and figures tell a story. They tell a story. For me, the story is very clear. It's provoking us, it's moving us to do something. We have to act. And it's not enough that we know. We have to do something about what we know. Been there. Now what? I take this quote from General George Patton. He said, never tell people how to do things. Tell them what to do, and they will surprise you with their ingenuity. It's my take. we do. These developments, these facts. I think the threat is there not just to general. What is our task as lawmakers? We are tasked really to keep society on even keel so that we don't move one way excessively or the other excessively. In my mind, law is there to help manage what is going on in society so that we don't kill one another. How do we manage what is happening now in cyberspace as it affects us in reality? How do we do that? Many of us don't even understand what cyberspace is all about. Many of us don't even understand what a cyber attack is. And very few of us care. It's notes here. The first one, we must build capacity. The data also shows that, take a look at this one. Internet system security professionals in Southeast Asia, look where we rank. Last. We have 84. Singapore leading the way, Malaysia, Thailand, Indonesia, Philippines. That's not a good place to be. And so what must happen? We must build capacity. What does that mean? We must build. We must train. We must locate. We must change our systems. Our educational system has to be able to move with the times as well. What do we value? If we value business, if we value zero poverty, if we value all of this, then we have to value this as well. All the indicators are showing that the economy is being driven now by something in the digital world. So therefore, anything digital is going to help us move out of the morass that we might be in today. So how do we prepare for that? Well, we can't just keep on building machines. We can't just keep on importing all of these fantastic gadgets. We have to be prepared also for what happens if we don't use them properly, or if our security is compromised. So, building capacity. Some more statistics, no? Just to share it. A few more statistics. The global shortage of information security professionals will reach 1.5 million in 2 years' time. And today alone, there are 1 million vacancies. Can't fill them up because there's no one qualified. Or if they're qualified, they're somewhere on the other side of the fence. Is it realized? Yeah. Your IT leaders know. They're probably shaking in their boots. They don't know what to do. But then they are required to handle the data, protect the data, make sure business goes, make sure the government office continues to provide its services, that their data is not compromised. But you have that statistic. Next, we must develop and nurture a culture of awareness and preparedness. This is the Global Cybersecurity Index created by the International Telecommunication Union. Take a look at where the Philippines stands. That's how I want to look at it. Plenty of opportunity. But if we are going to be prepared, if we are going to be able to solve this and tackle it head on, we need to prepare. Here's a 2016 data breach investigations report by Verizon. I pulled this statistic from the report. 63% of confirmed data breaches involved weak, default, or stolen passwords. Passwords. Who creates the password? The user. So what's wrong with the 63% of users who don't change their passwords or protect their data? Their data, which is equivalent to maybe 2 million pesos in your account. And for your son or your daughter, millions that you're holding in trust for someone else. What's so difficult about doing that? You have bad memories, you can't remember. You know, how about that too? Yeah. But there, no? Still, why do I present that? I present it again because it's a human problem. Technical thing requires banks to apply multi-factor authentication. Like you know where you live, your name, key of some sort, something that, okay, like your fingerprint or your retinal properties for your scan. So I just want to be able to mention this, to give credit where credit is due. You also have the Department of Information and Communications Technology, which last May 2 released their National Cybersecurity Plan. I had a chance to read it. I invite all of you to take a look at it. And it's a first attempt, it's a first effort to have something like this for the next 5 years. And I believe, if you have inputs, I'm sure that the department would be very welcoming of your inputs. Third, we have the Supreme Court Subcommittee on Commercial Courts. This I am excited about. They would to cybercrime. Our rules on criminal procedure, for those who are studying law or who are lawyers, I'm sure you appreciate that. For law enforcement agencies, I think it's about time also we take a look at this so that we find out what the difficulties are in law enforcement and find out how we can help our law enforcers through rules of procedure in cybercrime cases. And I think also importantly, we're telling the world, hey, we're serious about this. This is not something we just talk about. We want to do something about it. I also must mention here the excellent contributions of the Department of Justice, the National Bureau of and National Police. Rather than talk about the internal performance with respect, and they will tell you how difficult it is. Finally, I would like to just say that we must work together. We must work together. If there's anything underlying all of the problems worldwide regarding cyber, it's mutual cooperation, whether it be on a local level or on an international level. That's what GLACI is there for. That's what the Budapest Convention is there for. That's what our local laws, our domestic laws are there for. At the end of the day, it's really all about people doing the right thing at the right time together. So I'd like to leave you with this statement. It comes from Albert Einstein. The human spirit must prevail over technology. At the end of the day, it's not technology that should run us or should dictate to us what we should do, how we should live. That is something that is and should be left to us. So, in closing, I just want to say it has been an honor. I've stood here for the last hour and share my thoughts with you. I know some of you are tired. I apologize for that. Let me tell you that I did my very best to cut this down to an affordable 35 minutes, but it was really impossible. I hope you don't mind, and I hope you walk away here with some newfound knowledge and some newfound appreciation for the topic. There's much more to review, there's much more to research, and still much more to share. I hope we're able to do that in the future, either in a formal capacity in an informal gathering. I really want to thank you, PHILJA, my PHILJA family. You have bestowed upon me an honor that I could never have dreamed of. I wish somebody would send me a text message now so I know it's real. Thank you very much.
Thank you. A thought-provoking lecture. I'm sure the millennials, the super millennials, and then the non-millennials in the room would now like to ask our dear lecturer. No? But please hold on to your questions until we listen to the reaction to the lecture. So we have with us Professor Emerson Banyes, who would be providing the reaction to the lecture of Professor Caparas. Let me just say a few words about to introduce our reactor. Attorney Emerson Banyes worked as a programmer for one of the country's largest broadcasting network, developing web-based and mobile applications. As a law student, he served as a student assistant to Professor Jose Jesus Decine Jr., one of the country's leading authorities on cyberspace law. He was also a member of the editorial board of the Philippine Law Journal. Prior to his work at the Institute of Government and Law Reform, Attorney Banyes was a judge associate at the Castillo-Lamantan, Pantaleon, and San Jose law offices. He was also a lecturer at the College of Mass Communication in UP Diliman, where he taught major courses such as computer applications for research. Attorney Banyes was a lecturer in the UP College of Law before recently joining its regular faculty. Prior to joining the UP College of Law faculty, Attorney Banyes was a solicitor in the Office of the Solicitor General, where he worked directly under then Solicitor General Florentino M. Attorney Banyes graduated with a Bachelor of Arts in Communication Research from the UP Diliman College of Mass Communication in 2002. He received his law degree from the College of Law of the University in 2008 and was admitted to the Philippine Bar in April 2009. He received his LLM from Kyushu University in 2016. So, ladies and gentlemen, your honors, may we all welcome Professor Emerson Banyes.
Thank you for the honors, ladies and Justice Herrera. I would like to say congratulations first, and thank you to Attorney Caparas for his very informative and timely lecture. This reaction was originally supposed to be delivered by Professor Decine, one of the country's leading authorities on information technology law. I hope you're not too disappointed that I had to stand in his place. As always, I just hope to make up in enthusiasm what I lack in experience and authority. My first reaction is that I am very grateful, I'm very gratified that the lecture discusses the scope of the problems of cybercrime and cybersecurity before this audience. This is perhaps one of the more detailed, extensive discussion of the issue outside of the technical security community. The fact that this is now being discussed in the halls of the Philippine Judicial Academy gives me a lot of hope that we will continue to have a formalized institutional response to the problem. Having said that, allow me to offer an additional perspective, provide possible explanations for the issues outlined in the lecture, as well as frame possible responses. The insight that I offer is that cybersecurity, cybercrime, is also a function of the growing complexity of our software systems. The systems that our distinguished lecturer talked about are bound together by software, programs written in code. As software becomes more ubiquitous, as they become richer with more and more features, as they become more powerful and more intuitive, they also grow more complex. This graph indicates the trend of software complexity, showing the size and memory requirements of programs relative to the capacity of processors. As you can see, programs, the size and
the size and memory requirements of programs generally keep in pace with the available power of our processors, measured in the number of transistors. We've experienced this firsthand. We buy a new computer, we buy a new device. For the first few months, they're fast, they're smooth, and then eventually the performance plateaus, and then performance starts to degrade as we update the software, as we add more programs. Because software grows, it becomes more complex. Next slide. Next slide, please. Sorry. Yes. Okay, so this, let me illustrate further through an example and a thought experiment. This is a very basic sample program that contains two flaws, highlighted. Flaws that would enable unauthorized access or hacking. This is not something that will make the program stop working, so it's not a matter of function that can be easily detected. These are relatively subtle flaws that make the program a bit less secure. So, you can see that this is caused by 2 out of the 16 lines of code. So it's a percentage of, it's 12.5% of the program will make it not secure. So it's a reasonable proportion, right? 12%. Let's round it down to 10%. 10% not secure. You might be able to accept that. But compare this to the relative complexity, size of our commonly used programs. Facebook has more than 60 million lines of code. Windows has more than 50 million lines of code. Your ordinary Android phone would have something like more than 10 million lines of code. Can you imagine if 10% of those millions of lines of code would have potential, even just a potential security vulnerability? Even if we can say that the 12.5 or 10% ratio we had earlier was not typical for possible security flaws, even if we settle down for a rather unrealistic theoretical amount of 0.01%, that would still be 6,000 possible problems with Facebook, 5,000 possible vulnerabilities for Windows, 1,000 possible vulnerabilities for Android. If past trends are any indication, these software systems will only grow larger, making the threat even larger. The point I am trying to raise is that the systemic nature of security vulnerabilities means that we can't rely on technological solutions alone to prevent security breaches. As was mentioned in the lecture earlier, this is just a technological component. How about the human and social component? It would be too expensive, perhaps even impossible, to ensure that there will be absolutely no security vulnerabilities, at least in our technological infrastructure. The same logic applies to more conventional physical crimes. There's just too many street corners, too many people, too much messiness in human affairs. There's a limit to the resources we can invest in prevention. We can't put policemen and CCTV cameras everywhere. Even if we could afford it for other reasons of values, such arrangement would possibly be unbearable to us. So instead of over-investing in the physical infrastructure required for absolute prevention, we recognize that there is some equilibrium level and that crime is inevitable, and instead we have systems to deal with these post facto. We have systems of detection, We have systems of confirmation, apprehension, and punishment. Those systems are more often than not based on law. That is why I wish to emphasize the point raised by our distinguished lecturer that we need a legal response, more than just a technological response, to shape behavior and to build that culture of awareness and security. We will need clarificatory rules on digital evidence and collection. We will need support for digital forensics to treat how they will be received and analyzed in court. I hope that PHILJA will continue to be, as it does today, a venue for such conversation. Once again, congratulations to our lecturer, and thank you very much to everyone.
Thank you, Professor Banyas, for the reaction to the lecture of Professor Caparas. We now open the floor for questions for both Professor Caparas and Professor Banyas. Do we invite Professor Caparas, Copper, and Professor Banyas to the stage? So we have microphones on the aisle. So if you have questions, kindly state your name and the name of your office before asking your questions. Who would like to ask the first question?
Good afternoon.
Okay.
Yes, good afternoon.
Kindly state your name po
Yes,
and your
I'm
organization.
Judge Napoleon M. of the General Trias City Municipal Trial Court. Now, my concern is about hacking or hackers. Now, from a practical point of view, as I listened attentively, that it would seem that all the security and proposal to prevent cybercrime, it seems to be we are really helpless to admit it. Now, from the practical point of view, may I suggest if it is acceptable that we'll adopt the hackers vigilante, where some sort of a whistleblower, where rewards of money can be given to a hacker that can hack and breach into another hackers. From the practical point of view, well, as admitted by Atty. Banks, we are helpless. Technology cannot resolve this kind of cybercrime. So, why don't we adopt that hackers vigilante for a reward? Thank you.
So, who would like to, Professor Caparas, would you like to comment on the suggestion?
Well, my approach to technology has always been with an open mind. Nothing is wrong, okay, until it's tested and proven wrong. In this case, I think that's an idea that we can discuss. We can look at it. I know that there may be some there's a legal dimension to that. That's something that probably we can test it and find out if a proof of concept is doable and it's workable. But again, it's not unknown in the hacker world that you have counter hackers, you have the ethical hackers, and you have the hackers who just want to do it for love of country, love of God. So perhaps we might have something like that. Maybe it need not be called a vigilante group. No? Maybe we can give it something more legalistic, a legal personality that operates within the rule of law.
It's not for free. It's for reward. It should be a reward.
Well,
That's my point.
yes.
Just like what we are doing. For some crimes, we BIR, customs, Abu Sayyaf, we pay them a sum of money to resolve something like that. I don't think there's a need for legislations because we have this whistleblower law. We can just adopt parallel
Well,
remedy.
as I mentioned, sir, what we can do is look into it and find out. Let's experiment with it if it works.
Okay, thank you. This only
Professor
my-
Banias, would you like to offer your thought as well?
In a sense, something very similar is already being employed by private companies, although it works quite differently. Companies like Microsoft, Google, Apple are already offering bounties, not against hackers, but it gives bounties to hackers and other security research professionals to test their software. They're telling hackers, can you please try to break our software? If you break it and tell it to us first, give us time to fix it before you announce to the public, then we will give you a bounty. I think recently these companies pulled some money together. They sponsored a contest, and over $1 million worth of bounties were given to ethical hackers and security researchers. It's worth.
Thank you. Any other question, ma'am?
Hello. Good afternoon. I'm Attorney Basilia Ringon. I'm the Chief Judicial Records Officer of the Supreme Court. My question is, how prepared are we against hacking and cyber crimes? And how secure are our systems against any cyber infringement? I'm asking this question because our office is part of the sub-technical working group on e-courts. And we were also asked to review and give our comments on the system requirements of e-courts. And as you know, it is true that let's not be worried until there's a problem, but I'm more of a preventive person than a reactive person. So my question really is, how do we now help the court, and how will the Department of Court Technology assist the court in rendering technical assistance to people like us who are not even programmers or software developers? And we are asked to review complicated programs such as the e-courts, which should supposedly link the entire judicial system. That's all.
To whom do you address your
To
question?
any of the two distinguished speakers would kindly answer my question.
Okay, maybe we start with the lecturer and then our reactor.
Okay, I'll put on my public sector hat for now. Because the public sector government service, as you know, there are many challenges there to be able to address issues like that. And of course, primary, I think, of which is budget. To be able to address a concern like that really needs a healthy budget. Why? Because government does not have the inherent capacity, or put it this way, expertise to be able to deal with that on a sustained and prolonged basis. Normally, these are the resources that you'll be able to find in the private sector. So, on the one hand, yes, we have to rely on the private sector, but on the other hand, it's also a good thing because, like I said, we have to work together. Private sector and the government sector, the sectors just have to come together to be able to resolve this. And it makes sense because the government is not the only entity, although it's one of the top three that's been hacked, no? It's not the only entity that's in danger. Everyone is in danger. So it serves everyone's purpose. It's for everyone's benefit that we come together. So the concern that we have in the Supreme Court regarding that is the problem, is the concern of many others. Perhaps this is an opportunity for us to come together. We have the DICT there already, to have a wider based response to all of this, not just small pockets of resistance that in the end might not come up with anything, because you're up against a whole conglomerate of hackers and cyber criminals. And the minute you say anything like I've solved it. I'm totally hack-free. Talaga, ha? You really think so, huh? And anybody who has ever challenged hackers in the past have always had their faces made red because they were targeted. They were targeted. The minute they open their mouths, they get targeted. So I think it's better if we have a wider-based approach to this. But to address the question, how can we help, etc. Well, the networks are there. Myself and Attorney Banyes here, we have a considerable network of resources that support us. So maybe we can also put that on the table so that we can help.
Yeah, I would also refer back to the lecture in which it was said that there's a cultural human component to security. Not everyone can handle and reconcile and track the hackers, but there are things that you can that non-technical people can do to at least increase the security. First things is access control, the passwords. In one of my old offices, I caught my secretary just posting in a post-it, putting in a post-it the password to my account, to her account. Things like that are cultural. Can be solved at the office level. Things like vetting our suppliers, our IT suppliers. Things like making sure that access control is maintained so that when a person resigns or we take away, we manage his or her access to the system. Things like that can be done even by persons without technical training. Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions? Attorney Tina.
Hello, good afternoon. I have 2 points. One to
Kindly introduce
address.
yourself
Yes
and
po.
also your
Attorney
organization.
Tina de Guzman from American Bar Association, Rule of Law Initiative or ABAROLI. I would like to address that comment also, and I have a question for our speakers. First po, ABAROLI is supporting e-court. And Court Ad is here, and he knows that part of the program of e-court is to enable the Supreme Court, once USAID and ABAROLI are gone, or once the project is finished, that the Supreme Court is self-sufficient, the technology has been properly transferred, and the appropriate offices of the Supreme Court, specifically OCA and MISO, are empowered within the Supreme Court as well as within the individual e-court stations to address security issues, etc. So hopefully, once the project is fully turned over, the capacity has been transferred to the government partners. So I agree with the public hat comment of Attorney Caparas that it's not just the government, it's not just the Philippine government, but we get developmental assistance as well from our friends. My question is, because I'm working on something else, how related is our topic on cybersecurity to other crimes not mentioned in the presentation, including, for example, online sex trafficking? And which agencies should we be working with, and what types of assistance can development partners provide to the government?
Okay. Professor Caparas?
That's actually that will require a fairly long answer. Do you mind if we just take that offline so we cannot be hacked? Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Professor Banyes, would you have same thing? So after the lecture, you can just have your private conversation on that particular issue. Any other questions, Professor
It's
Feliciano?
not a question, it's a comment. I'm addressing my comment. We have programs for online sexual exploitation of children. And it's now on first year, we are on our third pilot program. We also have this involves a multidisciplinary team of prosecutors, social workers, policemen, DOJ, power attorneys, psychologists like Dr. Bernie Madrid, because it involves children, and of course the judges. So, to tell you the truth, we have one on anti-trafficking, we have one on, we are even conducting trainers of training so that we can spread it over the country. So I think if you look at the other side here, there is a seminar going on cybersecurity. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Professor Feliciano, for enlightening us on that one. Question at the back, please. Kindly introduce yourself and your organization.
Good afternoon. I'm Attorney Leonardo Limbo from Intellectual Property Office.
Okay, IPO.
My question is with regards to the interpretation of cybercrime law and other cyber-related laws. Basically, they are considered as special law, and meaning generally intent is not element of the offense. The lecturer, Professor Caparas, already have some concern with regards to the interpretation of privacy law, wherein even the head of the agency who has no knowledge of any or related to the management of the data or no intent on the violating any national privacy laws. What is your advice on interpreting those cybercrime related laws? Do you recommend that we try to make it RPC-like, wherein we try to incorporate intent or mere violation will be considered as a crime against law?
That's a good question, but even more difficult than the earlier one. That's a bar exam question, actually. So I hope you don't mind if we can do this offline, or perhaps we can have some other forum when that can be the topic. Because there are a lot of schools of thought there. Eh. Marami yan eh. Even the whole concept of liability for the mere fact that you're head of the agency. Ako, meron akong maraming issue din dyan eh. No? Like I said, it's not like that this is easy. If it's easy enough, then fine. Then you're just incompetent or negligent. But it's not easy. No matter how some people try, they can't understand it simply because it's complex, it's complicated. So will you hold them liable also? Will you put that in the qualification sheet, and because you don't understand it, you don't qualify? I'm not sure. That's the way to go. But so I hope you don't mind. We can do that offline.
Yeah, my quick answer is something similar. For these devices, for these technologies, the chain, the supply chain is complicated, and so the legalities are also layered. Who can we make liable? The programmer, the one who put the program, who embedded the program in the device and marketed it. So it's we'll have to pull a lot of things apart before we can. But yes, I hope that there will be plenty of opportunity to pick apart things like that. Thank you.
Okay. I'm sure PHILJA is picking up on this. Maybe PHILJA can organize a smaller group discussion on the issues that have been raised on other cyber-related laws, and really plan on how we can all work together in this one. I think we have one more opportunity for just one last question before we proceed. Sir?
Good afternoon. I'm Attorney Paulo Celeridad of the Commission on Human Rights. This is just a general question of cybercrime from a human rights perspective. I'll ask the question first, and then I'll give a little follow-up as to how it's supposed to, the proper context it's placed in. So the question is, how has it come to a point where freedom from cybercrime can be recognized as a basic human right? And what will this mean? Will this mean more levels of state regulation? the state as an actor or regulator, if at all, of cyberspace. I'd like to compare it, of course, kasi to the context of, this will sound a little bit, of course, you hear this everywhere, but of course, on the discourse of extrajudicial killings. So we all know from our international human rights obligations, the Philippines as a state has an obligation to protect citizens from arbitrary deprivations of life. You put that in the context of cybercrime, the state could be pictured to be a protector of rights of citizens from cybercrime-related attacks, specifically cyberbullying, cyber hacking, etc. And it's not just of big businesses, but of course of individuals, ordinary people with Facebook accounts and Twitter accounts, etc. So imagine if state responsibility is acknowledged, and as pointed out with all the statistics, there are widespread attacks. Will that put the Philippines as a state in such responsibility that it can be seen to be not doing anything at all regarding these kinds of attacks that happen on a regular basis? So what will that mean for investigation, prosecution, and of course, prevention of cyber crimes? And of course, the context is this will have an implication on the broader rights upon which cybercrime happens to attack. Of course, that means freedom of speech for anyone who is posting anything critical of anyone in power, for example. They are, of course, in danger of a certain sector of society, of course, with their massive resources that they can either be attacked in cyberspace or even at the comfort of their own home, that their accounts are compromised, etc. And of course, freedom of the press, and yes, all other encompassing rights. So going back to the question, has it come to that point where freedom from cybercrime can be recognized as a universal or basic human right? Thank you.
Who would like to answer that question?
Okay. Wow, that is a... okay. First, I won't guarantee that I'll be able to answer the entirety of your question. That is, quite a lot. First thought is that as these systems become more ubiquitous, as these systems become more part of our ordinary lives, I mean, how can you? We're seeing a sense of mainstreaming here. How can you distinguish cyber? How can we conceptually distinguish at some point cyber crimes from ordinary crimes for the purpose of making your distinction, right? If the answer to your question will then be, does the state have a responsibility for ordinary crimes, right? So way to deflect the question. The second thing I'm going to say is that the liability should be guided by the threat model. The lecturer earlier said that security, yes, we need to have security, but security from what, right? So the security and liability model that you should have, for a lone individual hacker is different from the security and liability model that you should have for an organized group. It will be different for a terrorist organization. It will be different for a nation state, right? So again, it would depend. Right now, I don't think the law makes those fine distinctions, but maybe it could help. Your question will be answered by making such distinctions based on the threat model. Yeah, so, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. No further questions. Okay, so there being no other questions, let me thank our Professor Manny Caparas and Professor Emerson Banyes for sharing with us their knowledge and insights about this subject matter. So I'm sure that this lecture has only jump-started further discussions and further collective and collaborative work on this particular issue. So at this point, while we prepare for the awarding ceremonies, May I call back the Supreme Court Choir for an intermission number. Once again, let's give a round of applause to our Supreme Court Choir. So we now proceed to the awarding ceremonies. May we call the Herrera family, Chancellor Ascuna and Professor Caparas, and also Justice Buzon for the presentation of the paper. Okay, and also for the presentation of the endowment, we again ask also the representative of the Herrera family to remain and also to present the endowment to Professor Caparas. Okay, and at this point, we give our plaques of appreciation. Again, may we ask Chancellor Ascuna and also Justice Buzon and Attorney Victoria to present the plaque. the testament of gratitude to Justice Ameurfina A. Melencio-Herrera, Attorney Florentino M. Herrera III, Dr. Victoria Lourdes M. Herrera-Ruiz, and Dr. Milagros M. Herrera-Arroyo for having contributed significantly to the enhancement of judicial education of the members of the judiciary. PHILJA Founding Chancellor Emeritus Justice Ameurfina A. Melencio-Herrera Lecture allow the members of the Philippine judiciary to benefit from the scholarly research and the presentation of Attorney Emmanuel L. Caparas, who delivered the paper and presentation on cybersecurity, the specter of crime, and evolving challenges of the bench and the bar. Okay, let's all have a round of applause for that. Okay. There's another plaque. This academic, which I will read, this academic recognition is presented to Attorney Emmanuel L. Caparas in fitting recognition of his excellent presentation and delivery of his scholarly paper entitled Cybersecurity, the Spectre of Crime, and Evolving Challenges of the Bench and the Bar. We would also like to call Professor Banyes. Okay, the plaque of appreciation also. This academic recognition is presented to Attorney Emerson Banyes for having been a reactor during the discussion of the paper of Attorney Emmanuel Caparas entitled Cybersecurity, the Spectre of Crime, and Evolving Challenges to the Bench and the Bar. Thank you po. And now, for the closing remarks, let me call again Chancellor Adolfo Ascuna.
Thank you, Attorney B.J. Angeles again. And the Chief Justice sent her regrets that she could not do the closing. So I'll just wrap this up. But first, I'd like to answer that thing on the proposal to consider freedom from cybercrime as a human right. Ganda yun, ah. But you know, the concept of developing a human right is by stages. There are now several stages of human rights. The first stage is the political, civil right, the press, freedom of religion. Yun ang first stage lang yun. Then nag-develop second stage, yung social and economic rights, right to equal pay for equal work. Hindi nila alam yun, nina Benjamin Franklin yun, hindi pa nila alam yun, bago yun. And yet that's also a fundamental human right. Right to education, right to participate in governance. Second stage yun. Then nagkaroon ng third stage of human rights, yung group rights, hindi rights of individuals, but rights of groups. For the first time, it was recognized that the fundamental human right can belong to a group, not just to an individual. Example, the right of self-determination. That's a human right. That's given to a group of people. Then a fourth stage of individual fundamental rights, not human anymore, is developing. That's the right of nature. Nature is now being recognized as having a legal standing, a legal personality in law, and having rights enforceable in law. We came close, the Philippine Supreme Court came close to recognizing this as a fundamental right in a recent case penned by Justice Teresita de Castro involving the resident mammals of Tañon Strait versus Secretary of Environment. The resident mammals of Tañon Strait filed a suit in the Supreme Court asking the Supreme Court to recognize their legal standing as persons under the law. And the Supreme Court almost said yes, but it said, not yet. You need a guardian. you need a champion to file the case for you. In this case, Tony Oposa. But the rights that we are recognizing through your guardian are your rights, the right of nature. When we originally drafted the provision in our Constitution on the right to a healthful environment, it was drafted this way. The state recognizes and shall protect the right of nature to follow her own rhythm and harmony. It was objected to by the lawyers in the group, starting with the Corozo Rosales, on the ground that nature, not being a person, can have no right under the law. And so we rephrased it and gave the right to the people, to you, to us. The state shall protect and enforce the right of the people to a healthful environment. And yet we are coming close to this fourth kind of right, where we are recognizing now nature to have a right. In other countries, they have done so. There is a river now in New Zealand that is given legal personality. The river can file a case to protect its environmental requirements. So, can we have another, maybe a fifth generation, where our rights are enforced not in the real world, but in the cyberspace? The right, fundamental rights of people to be free and safe in cyberspace. Actually, it's already in our Constitution. That is the braid provision. When we were drafting the present Constitution, one of the members, I think Caparas knows this, he was also in the staff of Roberto Concepcion in the Hong Kong. One of our members was Florentino Rosario Braid, an expert in IT. And she submitted one proposal which none of us understood. None of us. And it said this: the state shall have the responsibility of providing a digital framework where there is a free flow of information into and out of the country. And there are highways that provide exchange of information in a manner consistent with freedom of the press and fundamental rights. Yan ang great provision. Since none of us understood it, we adopted it in toto. So it's there. Years later, we realized what it meant. Of course, it meant the information highways, the portals, the internet. It meant that the state has the responsibility to provide for a framework of the internet within our sphere, such that freedom of the people will be protected, such that freedom of the press will be honored. Nandyan yan. Tingnan niyo, general provisions of the Philippine Constitution, the braid provision. Kaya hindi na kailangan. Nasa Constitution na natin. It is how this present Constitution was so advanced. We provided for freedom from nuclear weapons, but not from nuclear energy. Because we may use nuclear energy, but we have no use for nuclear weapons. Kaya that is something we have to re-examine. If we do away with the present Constitution, let's see if we can retain some of its good features. Anyway, I'm just supposed to wrap up. I would like to thank again the family of our founding Chancellor Emeritus Ameurfina Aguinaldo Melencio-Herrera. And I'd like to thank our founding Chancellor Emeritus herself for these lectures and for the endowment that it involves. It is supposed to, and it does, enhance the capacity of our lecturers, of our academic council. It's a continuing improvement that we need within our core of professors. So maraming salamat po, and thank you for your attendance. Thank you for questions. Thank you for your participation. And may pakain ba ang PHILJA ngayon? Oh, I think thank you for the pakain. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Sadali lang po. Thank you very much, Justice Ascuna. That ends our program for today, and thank you again for joining us this afternoon and for also raising your questions. After the singing of the judiciary hymn, please join us for some refreshments at the dining hall. Also, for the lawyers, please don't forget to return the accomplished MCLE forms at the Secretariat's table outside the auditorium. And for those taking the shuttle bus back to the Supreme Court, please board the bus in 30 minutes after you take your merienda. Once again, thank you very much for your kind attention and active participation this afternoon. Let's all rise for the judiciary hymn.